Hi, Ron Jones from the Lean Brace. I've been getting a few questions lately about how we build the sticks that we use for training on the Meel and Indian club patterns. So these are what I would call the Meel training sticks, and they're 1.5 inches in diameter. I have found that the hickory hardwood works the best, and I get that wood from a company called Baird Brothers in Ohio. So it's 1.5 inches diameter, about 2.5 feet long, and hickory hardwood round stock produces a very nice Meel training stick. So the idea is to get a little bit of weight in your hand, a little bit long lever to simulate the Meel pattern that would be used with a club like this. So to go from a light Indian club to a heavier club with a longer lever is a pretty big jump. And so the idea is to moderate that or regress it so you can learn the neural or brain patterns, and then you can always work up in weight. So what I do is I order the stock in about 5-foot sections, and then I cut them in half. And what I found over time is that this 2.5-foot long section, while it's about the size of a Meel and it gives a pretty good weight on your shoulder, it was a little bit too long for people that were under 6 feet tall. So what I started doing is cutting a stick 2 feet 3 inches tall, and even a little shorter stick that's 2 feet tall, and this will work okay for a child or an adult that's a little over 5 feet. So I've got 2 feet 3 inches, or 2 feet 6 inches, and these are the sticks that I use for the Meel training. Now what I've done is to add a little grip. I've taken my grinder and I've notched this handle into the stick so it gives a little traction for the hand. I've taken some fluorescent gaffer tape used for audiovisual tech people, and I put a little strip in the end that gives a little bit of visibility for a line of fire, especially with people that aren't used to swinging things of length like this. And then I get fancy and I burn a few stripes on the end just to make it kind of cool. I finish sand these and use tung oil on them, and I use different finishes. Usually use a natural finish on the Meel sticks just so they're a little brighter and easier to see swinging through the air. But I'll go through the process of this in a couple different video clips and show you part of the construction so you get an idea of how to do it yourself at home. So you can do all the sanding by hand, of course, but when you make hundreds of sticks like I do, it helps to have a few power tools. So the idea after you make the length cuts is to take a sander and round off the sharp edges of the stick, because when you initially cut that, there's actually some little splintery ends right here, and it can cut a person's leg if you swipe across the leg when you're practicing, which can happen with stick training. So what I'll do is I'll round these off really nice, and I found 2 different types of sanders are helpful. This first type of sander actually rotates the sandpaper in this direction, and I use a pretty coarse grit of sandpaper here, so it's pretty rough, and that takes a larger amount of wood off the end. And so what I do is I sand this end butt really nice and smooth, and then I take that about a 45-degree angle and I just edge that off all the way around, and then I'll kind of do this and round off the edges of the 45. Okay, so that's for the moving the larger amount of wood. And then at the end, I'll take this little finish sander. This is an oscillating sander, so the paper just kind of shakes all over the place. This is a finer grit, so it's a little bit smoother sandpaper. And I'll do the same thing. I'll polish the end a little bit and kind of round it. If you use this the whole time, this kind of paper tears pretty easily. But the paper that sticks on this is Velcro, and it's really, really thick, and it basically doesn't tear. So I found this to be helpful for working on a sharp edge, and then when that edge is rounded, you can hit it with this, and this paper will last a little bit longer. For the actual length of the stick, I use a really super fine sandpaper, which I'll show you in a minute. and I just go back and forth, and it gets any kind of little splintery parts of the grain out. But I like the hickory in particular because it's a pretty closed grain. When I tried to use some of the oak woods or some of the other types of hardwoods, the grain was too open, and it was just a little bit splintery even after fine sanding. So anyway, for a number of different reasons, I like the hickory. It's heavy, and it sands out pretty well too. So there's my tips on the power sanders. Okay, let's get this end cut, sand it off, and then take the edge off about a 45-degree angle here. Alright, because I'm anal retentive, I like to sand most of the crosscut off there, get it nice and smooth, but these edges are rounded, and now there's no splinters. And then I'll fine sand that with the other sander as well. Alright, now it's time to put some, basically these are like traction grip safety notches into the training stick. So what I do is I just break it up into quarters, top, bottom, and then both sides, make a little notch, and that gives my hand a little traction. So I just eyeball this. It's basically a little bit wider than an adult hand, and that helps the stick from flying out. So it's a little bit of a safety grip. The grinder I use is just what's called a little peanut grinder for welding, and this is for metal, and it notches into the wood really nice. So I just use a little chevron design. They're kind of facing opposite ways, but the idea is to give the hand a little bit of traction. These are for some women that have smaller hands, so that should be good. Alright, now it's time to do a little orbital or oscillating sand work here on the ends. I've already hit these on the ends with the other sander, but this is a finer sandpaper, 400 grit. Also hit this a little bit. It's got a little splintery here from the grinder. So that really finishes. It's like glass now. It's really nice, smooth, no sharp edges. The rest of it, I'll just take some very fine grit and kind of go back and forth here and smooth that out, because having your hand around it works better than a flat sanding surface. But I do like to hit this part with the sander and get the rough stuff off. That's it. Almost ready for the staining and some other fine detail work. Alright, the last order of business, I've scuffed off the ends with the nice 220 grit paper. This is P2000. It's scuffing paper for like fine finish work on a car. So what I do is I try to get this as smooth as glass here. Right, so I've already done the areas where I use the grinder. So I'll just take this and rub it back and forth a little bit, and then I want to check with my fingertips to make sure that there are no splinters, because ideally after the stain and the tung oil, I'll use a very fine steel wool to go over it and knock any roughness off. And if there's anything sticking up, it can cause a splinter to pull up, and then you've got this whole chunk out of the wood, which is a real drag. It happens sometimes even with all this, but if you're careful with the steel wool, you'll be okay. So now this is really smoothed out just like glass. I'm ready now for some initialing on the end for my female friends in my class, and a little bit of artwork and some staining and tung oil. Alright, this is some nice little finish work. I found this little mini branding iron. The tips can actually be changed, so I've got one that just burns initials in. This one has kind of like a little flower or funky design on it. It's made by Walnut Hollow. I think I found it at Michael's Art Supply. But this one makes a nice little design. This is from my friend Joel that I train with, and it's just a little fancy. I put a little thing in the end there. I don't normally do this just for my workshop training sticks, but if I'm going to make one from one of my friends, I'll get a little carried away. So now this stick, it's all sanded, the initials are there, and all these are ready for staining. And then I will take some fine steel wool in between coats of the tung oil, and I'll put probably about 4 or 5 coats of tung oil on these. And then the last step will be to burn some racing stripes in the end with my torch. Okay, my sticks are finally ready for staining, but there's one little extra step that I do, and I like to knock the dust off the stick with a little broom. And then this is just something extra, but I'll take a tack rag, and this is a little cheesecloth thing with some kind of gummy glue stuff on it, and I'll just lightly wipe the dust off the stick. And I suppose you don't have to do that, but it just gives you a little bit cleaner surface, and then you'll get a little more dust on that. So I will do that in between the steel wool polishing as well. Ready for stain. Alright, time for some staining. So you can use any kind of stain. I typically use the Minwax. It seems to be pretty reliable for the quality. Use some kind of soft rag, an old sock or something like that, that's fairly smooth so it doesn't snag on the wood. And this particular tent is called Colonial Maple. And for some of the sticks in the workshops, I finish them pretty light. I don't want them dark. I actually want them somewhat light and white so they're easily seen. And for some of the custom sticks for my friends, I'll finish them with a gun stock or a darker color. But most of the workshop sticks I finish lighter, more natural. These notches, you have to get a little excess on there so the stain actually goes down and soaks in. So it'll look a little messy at first, but you want to make sure that it's covered. And I rub it in quite a bit. I can do that because I've spent a lot of time sanding and smoothing this wood down. So hopefully I won't get any splinters. So that's the staining process. I'll let them dry for a full day, and I'll take some steel wool and just lightly buff them off, and then I'll start applying coats of tung oil, probably at least 4 coats of tung oil. Alright, this is just for fun. The actual Filipino fighting sticks have some various burn patterns on them with some really cool notching for a hand grip. I can't do anything that fancy, but I do the grinder stuff. And then I like cars, so I thought I would put some kind of NASCAR looking racing stripes in the end. And so typically the sticks that I have for my workshops, I'll use 2 stripes, and the sticks I make for my friends have 3. That's the differentiation. But I use a Benzomatic small portable blowtorch. And I've sanded these and I've stained them, and I have 1 coat of tung oil on these already. The key is not to completely set the wood on fire. So that's it. Depending on the wood and the cut of the wood, they can add some nice kind of a, you know, different spider web looking designs, but it adds a little more flair, and also it adds a little more visual stimulation to the eye in terms of line of fire and, you know, keeping out of the way of the end of the stick. So here's the finished product. These are the sticks that I made for the ladies I train with on Monday nights. So they're a little bit fancier. Got some nice detailing there. A little bit different tone or tint on those sticks for my personal friends. But these are the ones that I use in the workshops. So still a very nice hickory stick. Heavy, does the job for the Meel pattern training. So that's the process. Hope you enjoyed it. A lot of value making your own sticks. The satisfaction of creating something with your hands and then training with it, it goes beyond just the fitness.